This is Mrs. Murphy here at Weber State University, and today we're going to show you how to use some of the math functions in Java. We're going to talk a little bit about the math functions, and then we're going to demonstrate using our window.java file, and we're going to create a simple duck hunt program. Remember that old Nintendo game where the little dog comes out and laughs at you? Yeah, we're not going to have the dog, and ours is going to be really simple, but it's at least something kind of like duck hunt. So here's how our little duck hunt program will work. We have our little green duck going across the screen, and if I click on it, it should give me some points. You have to click pretty close to it. This is kind of circle collision because it's like there's a little space in here I could click, but it'll still give me points if I click in there. And so this is our basic little duck hunt. It'll keep going until the timer runs down to 0. You've seen some of the standard addition, subtraction, multiplication, and this with the star, and the division with the slash. But there are a few more you need to know about. There's some that allow you to add and subtract from the value of a variable. The first one is the plus plus operator. It just adds 1 to the value of the variable. Suppose you have a variable I years, and you do an I years plus plus. The value would now be 1 higher. So if your years were, if you had 10 years and you did years plus plus, you'd now be 11. That value would have 11, or the variable would. The plus equal operator is if you want to add more than 1. So here I can do an I years plus equals 3. Now I have 3 more years instead of 1. Now the same goes with the subtraction. The minus minus makes us have 1 less in the D spending cash variable. If the data type is a double, you can also subtract a decimal amount from the variable, as with D spending cash minus equals 1050. Now there's 3 types of division in Java that you should be aware about. Modulus division is when you're trying to find the remainder of something after dividing. Int division, that's kind of just what happens when you divide an int by an int. It chops off any decimal places. So 1 divided by 2 should be 0.5, but since 1 is an int and 2 is an int, 1 divided by 2 equals 0. And then that was kind of a tricky one, because then you have to think about, oh, why is it 0? Oh, because the decimals places are chopped off. Well, regular division is just kind of what you're used to with a calculator. 1 divided by 2 would be 0.5, just like it should be. Here's an example of integer division. You have 7 people, and they each need a partner. How many groups of 2 can you make? Well, one's going to be left out, so there's an odd, because there's an odd number, so only 3 groups. A whole number divided by a whole number chops off any decimal places. Now we have that same scenario, but this time we're going to be using modulus division. This states that if they're divided into groups, how many people would be left without a partner? Well, 1, since 7 mod divide 2 is 1 left over. Now the math library has trig functions such as cosine, sine, tan. There's many more, but we're not going to concentrate on those right now. There are some math functions for square roots and powers, and those can be a little tricky. So that's the 2 that I want to discuss with you guys. Math.sqrt gives us the square root of whatever values in the parentheses. In this case, we have the square root of 9 should be 3. Math.pow gives you one number raised to the power of the other number, the second number. In this case, we have math.pow 4, 3. This is just 4 to the 3rd power, or 64. And today, to demonstrate some of the math functions, we're going to code a little, it's kind of like a duck hunt game, but I'm going to draw targets instead. I decided targets were easier to, like skeets were easier to draw than ducks. So you can still call it duck hunt though, I guess. So I have the window.java template that I've given you open, and you can just download that from the previous chapter. I don't think I put another download for it. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this one so we don't have too many files with the same name. And if you remember, we do that by just going to find and replace and type in window and replace it with duck hunt. And make sure you do replace all. If I can see where replace all is, there we go. So that will rename all of the code pieces that have window in it. Now we got to save the file, so do a save as, not a save. That way we can save it as our new duck hunt. Okay, so we're going to need a couple of variables. We're going to need their score, and I'm going to call it I score. That way we can keep it with our notation style. This is just going to keep track of how many times you've hit the little thing. We're going to have a little symbol, a little disc flying across the screen, and you have to click it as many times as you can until the time runs out. We are going to have a timer, if I could spell private. And once again, I'm going to do double on timer. Maybe I did float last time, I can't remember. But just because our timer, our event runs 20 times per second, so we got to increment it by 0.05 to get seconds. Okay, now I need a variable for the location. I'm trying to talk and type at the same time, it's not working. I need a variable for the location of where my target is. So I'm going to say private int I target, and it's just going to be the X location. The reason why it's just the X is because it's just moving sideways. We could do one that would move more directions. That would be okay. And I'm going to set it at 50 to start. That way it's a little bit on screen. Okay, you're not going to need anything in initialize. And in draw, we're going to want to draw our timer and our score and our target on screen. So I'm going to do a couple of draw strings. Now if you like, show you a little code to change the font. You can say, put a little comment in to tell you what it is. G.set font, and in here you could say new font. And then the font is whatever font you choose. Do you want Arial? Do you want Times Roman? Do you want what have you? And then you're going to put in font dot plain, and plain has to be in all caps. And that you could also do font bold or font italic there, so long as they were in all caps. And then you can change the size to whatever size would meet your needs. So I'm going to do 20-point font, and that would just change the font of our G.drawstrings. And if you don't want to put that in, that's just fine. I'll understand it. It will work without. So here I'm going to display my timer on screen. And I will put that at 50 pixels over and, I don't know, 60 pixels, 50 pixels down. However do you want to put this thing? 50-50 sounds good. I also want to draw my score on screen. And be called the score I score. I'm going to still put that 50 pixels over, but I think I'm going to put it maybe, let's see, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 pixels down. That way it's below it. We can just kind of check that out a little bit by running the program, seeing where it shows up, making sure they don't cover over the top of each other. Oh, I'm missing a bracket, aren't I? Sorry about that. So here we have an opening, but there's only one closing. So I'm going to go ahead and put another closing bracket back in. I always try and compile and run it a couple of times so I don't get so many errors at once. Okay, so now we can see my score and my timer showing up, and the font's quite a bit bigger than it was last time. Okay, now I'm going to draw my little skeet, and it's just going to be a circle. So I'm going to say G.fill. Well, maybe we might want to change the color, huh? Pick a color. What's your favorite color? There we go. Okay, so we called it I target the X. This is the X location. So I'm going to put I target X there. Now the Y, well, I'm just going to put this maybe 200 pixels down on the screen. The width and the height I'm going to set to 50 pixels. That way I have kind of a square that they can draw. Now I'm going to do a little inner circle just so it's two colors. And also to show you how to draw based upon this one X and Y coordinate. So here I'm going to say, oh, I didn't want draw oval. I want fill. I want that filled in. Make that nice and dark. Okay, so this is going to be like a little bit smaller. instead of being 50 pixels, I'm going to make this circle 30 pixels, and it should be centered right inside the other one. So I still want to base it off of my coordinate because it's part of the target. But if it's going to be only 30 pixels, it can't just be exactly at this point, otherwise it won't be centered. So I'm going to add 10 pixels on each side, on the X and on the Y. That way it's centered, and then there's like a 10 pixel border around it. So the X is going to be I target X plus 10. The Y will be 2, 10. And then the size is going to be 30 by 30. So now if we were to run this and take a look and see what it looks like, we should have a circle inside of a circle. Kind of looks like our little target or skeet. Okay, so our draw method is now done. All we have to do is handle our timer. I'm going to skip to our timer because that one's a little easier. So I'm going to go down to our timer code, and it's going to be pretty much the same thing we did in our cookie clicker this time. So if our timer is greater than 0, then we're going to have it go down. We're going to move our duck, and then that sort of thing. So here, my timer, I can't remember what my timer is called. It's called D-timer, wasn't it? D-timer. So here's my timer tick. If D-timer is greater than 0, well, what do I want to happen? I want my timer to go down. D-timer minus equals 0.05. There we go. Now my timer is going to be going, and it will stop at 0. I also want to move my duck, or my target, I guess it was. I didn't want to have to draw a duck in this. So I'm going to, it's I target X. All I have to do is add to that X variable. I'm going to add maybe 10 pixels. Okay, this number right here, the 10, that will adjust the speed at which your target moves. If you do 10, it'll be one speed. If you do 5, it'll go a little slower. If you do 15, it'll go a little faster. You can kind of play around with this number to get the speed that you want. Now, eventually, that target's going to go off screen. And rather than creating another target and having it, you know, come on the screen again so you can shoot that one, we're just going to wrap this one so it'll jump back over to the other side of the screen and be the new target. So all we have to do that is say, well, if our variable is greater than the size of the screen, our screen size is 800 pixels. If your screen size is bigger, you might have to adjust this number if you've changed your screen size. So if it gets greater than 800 pixels, let's just set it back to 0, and it will appear as a new target appearing on screen. So let's go ahead and run this one, and we'll show you our timer, and we'll show you there's our target, and as soon as it goes off screen, it's going to come back on screen. Now, as I'm doing this, I notice again that my timer looks terrible with that huge number hanging off after it because I have it stored in a double. So let's go ahead and chop the decimal places off to just whole numbers. And you can do that in your draw. You don't want to actually delete that value. We're just going to chop them off in the display. So here's my timer. Right in front of my timer, I'm just going to put int in front of that, and that way it stores it, displays it as an int, even though it has decimal points. Okay, the last part. Here's our new stuff. This is where we do the math library. We're going to code the mouse pressed. Now, in the last one, all we had to do was say, well, hey, if the timer is greater than 0, then go ahead and give them a point whether they clicked or not. In this case, we want to have to hit the target. So we have a little bit of math involved. What we're going to do is we're going to calculate the distance between the mouse and the target. And if our distance is less than 50 pixels, because that's the size of our target, that means we've got it. All right? There is our distance formula. So we need an x1, a y1, an x2, and a y2. And we'll plug it into this formula, and that will give us the distance. All right? So here we go. Let's go ahead and code this. Let's get our variables ready. So we're going to need a distance. We're going to start that at 0 and then give it some other values. We need an x1, and the x1 I'm going to have be our mouse. Our mouse has a little mouse event right here, and this can give us the location of the x and the y. So I'm going to use mouse.getX. Has to be an uppercase X there. Now I'm going to do mouse, or the y1 value is going to be equal to mouse.getY. There we go. Now I've got my x1 and y1. I need my x2 and y2. So here I'm going to say int x2 is equal to my target. Now keep in mind that this value right here is the upper left corner of my target. My target is 25 pixels wide, or 50 pixels wide. So I want to add half of that. So I'm going to say I target x plus 25, and that will give me the center of the target. Now I got to do the same thing with the y. Int y2 is going to be, my target was 200 pixels down. So I'm going to do 225 to get the center of the target. 225. There we go. So now here's where we're going to do our distance formula. If you remember back from the PowerPoint, to do the square root of, you do SQRT. Now I'm going to put the opening and closing parentheses in the semicolon now so I don't forget later on. But we want the square root of what? Well, we want the square root of x2 minus x1 squared. Let me go back to that distance formula slide again. Gosh. Okay, here we go. So to do the something squared, we have to say math.pow. And I want x2 minus x1 comma to the power of 2. Don't forget that closing parenthesis. This parenthesis closes this one. The open, close. This one closes this one. Okay, so now I've got to add that onto my math.pow for y. So y2 minus y1 to the power of 2. There we go. There is my distance formula. So now all I have to do is see if I hit it. If I do, give them a point, and we've got this. So if d distance is less than 50, because that's the size of my skeet, then I score plus plus. Okay, now I do want one other feature in here. As soon as the game is over, people could still keep clicking on this and get more points. So I want to prevent them from doing that. And I could put another if statement in. That would also work. But I do want to show you another way of doing this. Do you remember those AND operators? Well, Java has one as well. We can say we want both of these conditions to be true. The way you do AND in Java is the shift 7, the ampersands. So long as the distance is less than 50 and the time, d time, is greater than 0, then I will allow them to score points. So this should now work. Let's just go ahead and test this out, or maybe get some errors. Did I not call it d-time? Did I call it d-timer? Let's go back and check. D-timer. I called it d-timer. Forgot the R. Sorry about that. Okay, now let's go back and check. Okay, so here's my little skeet going across the screen. If I click anywhere on the screen, nothing happens. But if I click right on the target, it does. So we've learned not only the distance formula, but a little bit about collision detection as well. All right, so for the homework assignment, you can either just submit this project that we've done together for half credit. That's if this is the newbie level. Or I've given you a keyboard versus mouse game that you can try out. Here, let me give you show you the example of this. Well, let me pause it while I'm opening it up. Okay, here's an example of the keyboard versus mouse game. Hide the code. If I press any key on the keyboard, it moves this one. If I press the mouse, either button on the mouse, it moves this one. And your job is to get it. Oh my goodness, the keyboard's so easy because all you have to do is hold the keyboard down and you win. And it will tell us, hey, the keyboard wins. So that is your assignment. It's super similar to the one we just did, but instead of having the timer move the thing across the screen, you'll have a mouse and the keyboard move things across the screen. You'll still base these shapes upon a variable, and you'll need 2 different variables for each player. All right, good luck with the homework assignment. Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to send screenshots and code, and I can answer questions pretty good usually. All right.